Hi there, my name is Bendall, and I'm a teaching fellow at the University of Edinburgh. The title of my presentation today is Virtual Choirs and Visual Framing, or the subtitle, How Do You Get to Carnegie Hall? Log in. To start today's presentation, I want to take a journey not to Carnegie Hall, but to the Metropolitan Opera House. This is the opening sequence for the Metropolitan Opera's recent broadcast of Adriana Découvre in 2019. It's easy to be overwhelmed by the visually striking nature of this particular production, but there are certain elements you might miss. Musically synchronized edits, a distinctive branding and font, and critically, the Metropolitan Opera highlighted at the very beginning as the institution in which this opera is broadcast. You may be watching this in a cinema, on a Blu-ray, or, as has been the case recently, on your computer, smartphone or tablet. But make no mistake, this is a Metropolitan Opera performance in your home or in your hands. Since Christopher Small's groundbreaking studies in what he defined musicking, the aesthetic meanings of performance and listening, we have employed elements of this framework to consider the ways in which musical performance is experienced, created and consumed. In Small's own words, there is a relationship between the elements of the physical setting, on the one hand, and on the other, the relationships between performers and listeners. As we have seen, performance spaces affect greatly the relationships that are created among those that are inside them. There is a relationship between the ways in which the performers relate to the listeners, on the one hand, and on the other, the relationship between the performers and the sound relationships they create. The more prescribed the sound relationships, the less control the listeners have over the course of the performance. Small's theory forces a critical assessment not only of the how of music making as a technical, mechanical process, but the where of music making. What setting is the sound produced in, and does the setting impact on the relationship between performer and listener? In Small's theory, not only can there be an impact, but the more prescribed that impact is, the less control listeners have in that relationship, and conversely, the more control a performer has in that relationship. Carlo Sanchirelli expanded on this in his excellent study on cinematic listening and paratexts of opera DVDs, the DVD cover, the menu, the framing of the musical production of an opera, and specifically how the paratext may be complicated in framing. To quote, "The margins of a text are a privileged place for identifying emergent, and often contested, cultural meanings. In the case in question, the framing invites us to look beyond the televisual and alerts us to the role played by the cinematic as a cultural interface. It is a model that bridges over the gap between medium and content, opening up opera videos to a wider range of resonances in ways that can redefine their cultural placement and value." Sanchirelli's observation is critical. A paratext, or the framing of the musical work, can, in fact, influence a multiplicity of factors and problematize the traditional perception of musical performance. Musical performance has often problematized some elements of its production. The contentious authorship relationship between performer, composer, and consumer, or read listener, has long been debated, and since the advent of recording technology, similar challenges have existed in considering the role of whomever presents the performance through a given recorded media. I take a personal interest in choral music on screen. I'm a choral conductor and singer in my professional life, so I have a vested interest in how the medium I engage with is widely disseminated. I also take an interest in how music, presented in alternate mediums, evokes alternate modes of understanding and interpretation, and this has been particularly evident, of course, in the rise of the virtual choir. The term virtual choir is a hold-all term for a variety of modes of multi-tracked choral performance in use since the early 2010s. The technology is not new. Its application in the wider scale is something of a phenomenon with the wider spread of affordable editing technology that is continually changing. A year from now, I could be giving a conference talk on the role of TikTok in virtual choirs. It could easily be considered. The rise of YouTube in particular as a sharing medium for such videos evokes what Nicholas Cook describes as a digital participatory culture, which is prone to riffing off ideas or redactive creativity, altruistic collaboration, and the growth of wider online communities, not solely in social media platforms but in virtual worlds and gaming communities, such as Second Life. In this interpretation, I define virtual choir as something that is multi-tracked, pre-recorded, and edited together, essentially ensuring there is additional authorship in use. This is different to music created using video conferencing platforms such as Skype, Teams, and Zoom. For a variety of reasons, these platforms are created to encode conversation rather than singing, and so the presentation of this changes from use to use. It was on YouTube that what is understood to be the first virtual choir was published, certainly what is popularly attributed as such, a version of Eric Whitacre's Sleep. In time, with the rise of attention, marketing, and financial contribution, more complex edits and new works have been made, with larger numbers of participants. Indeed, the community for virtual choir itself became a critical element of how we now consider choirs and amateur music making in the light of the 2020 coronavirus pandemic, where in-person performances with choirs have become extremely limited. This presentation is not placed to illustrate the etymology of the virtual choir, other than to share what I have previously noted, that a virtual choir is a mode of music making that enables alternate meanings of choral music performance. Further, limitations in this study, and this conference talk, prevent a large-scale sampling of virtual choirs. This is the topic for a larger study. The presentation considers technical elements of virtual choir production and framing, and what values may be projected onto these performance spaces given pre-understood cinematic norms. In doing so, I hope to demonstrate that, like in a live performance, a virtual choir is more than the sum of its constituent parts, but rather a joint authorship process in which its framing works with the musical content to embrace new modes of understanding. A quick word on definition of what I mean by examining virtual framing. Most participants who perform in virtual choirs sing along to a guide track, metronome, keyboard accompaniment, or recording of singers as an example. Through this, participants can, eventually, be synchronized more efficiently and become part of a larger byproduct. While virtual choirs are, as I've already explained, a kind of hold-all term for any multi-tracked, non-live choral recording, by far the most typical image rendered of a virtual choir is of a kind of grid formation of singers on a plain background, singing in synchronicity. Singers are typically framed in close-up and record using a mobile phone, webcam, or other recording device. Recordings are usually in one take, and production values can vary widely between individual participants depending on the technology and skill sets available. It's not surprising that many jokingly refer to these recordings as being in the Brady Bunch style on social media. These recordings are functional in presenting the musical work, and many are quite similar. However, without framing in context, it is hard to forget the fact that this is a group of individuals who have recorded independently at different times and places. This is quite different to what is typically expected of a choral community, used to meeting at specific times and places to make music. What interests me more is those virtual choirs which vary this model and present singers in alternate settings. Therefore, the following 3 examples should be considered case studies. In each, I briefly explain the background of the work and what the virtual framing, backgrounds, footage, specific staged use of singers, does to impact on the narrative presented. Of the virtual choirs featured in this study, projects led by the American composer Eric Whitacre have consistently proven to have the largest number of participants and views. At the time of writing, this 2013 video, Fly to Paradise, recorded by 5,905 singers, had garnered over 2.46 million views on YouTube. His most recent virtual choir, Sing Gently, performed during the coronavirus pandemic, features over 17,500 singers and has garnered 1.6 million views since July 2020. Fly to Paradise adapts material from Paradise Lost, Shadows and Wings, which was a musical theatre work written by Whitacre in 2007. The work is, according to the website, heavily inspired by and infused with the style of Japanese anime and manga, a powerful and visceral hybrid of musical theatre, opera, electronica, film score, and Asian drumming. The show itself had only a limited run in the United States and is yet to undergo a significant international staging. It features only limited choral fragments. A New York Times review by Steve Smith noted, quote, As a vehicle for a Titanic choir, it fell short. Choral passages, though predictably ravishing, made up only a tiny fraction of an agreeably bombastic affair. Elements of the staging, musical theatre, Japanese anime and manga, etc., and influence are felt in the imposing grey CGI framework of Flight to Paradise. Beginning mostly in different shades of grey and beige, a woman, referred to in the credits as Angel, whose design with large eyes and contoured face contains many allusions to Japanese anime, leaves a barren, mountainous area and walks through city streets surrounded by imposing buildings, where black windows gradually fill with singers' individual videos in black and white. Whitaker explains in an interview that these singers are positioned in buildings assigned based on the countries and geographical regions they submit from. Singing a solo melody is a soprano singer, seen in mid-shot positioned on a billboard atop one of the buildings. Several singers are presented in close-up, but a vast majority are blurred and unclear. They are presented as part of the City of Sounds, rather than on an individual basis. The chorus refrain, "And all I want to do is fly," is sung by soloists from within the virtual choir as the angel discovers wings on her back. Panning shots across the top of digital buildings present a sense of scale and a sense of city community among all participants. As the angel takes to the air at the musical peak, the bass drop moment, the buildings begin to fill in vibrant colour. Although preserving a sense of uniformity, singers' windows do not turn into full colour, but rather present a coloured filter. Glitter effects across the screen contrast with the stillness at the beginning of the video. Visually striking in these fast sections, with the exceptions of soloists, individual singers are flown past quickly. The role of most singers in this work, as intimated earlier, is delegated more to atmospheric and structural effect, and this is reflected not solely in musical content but in visual priority. Dramatic moments focus more on our CGI heroine rather than specific singers. Closing shots, as earlier, pan across the top of this idealized digital community of animated buildings, all belonging together as part of their own colourful paradise. Indeed, in the closing credits, the participants of Virtual Choir 4 are labelled the stars of the show, and nearly 5 minutes is dedicated to listing all of the participants and financial backers. While this participation may make them stars, this is visually at odds with the content presented. What is clear, however, is the use of non-musical staging of the virtual choir to convey a narrative idea. This mise en scène not only infers the environment of Whitaker's foray into musical theatre, but also that this virtual choir, though geographically distant and separated by borders and backgrounds, is its own community. There's a lot to be said about virtual communities, such as in MMORPGs, Second Life, and so forth, as well as cultural theories of fandom and how this reflects on Whitaker's online choral community. This is content that deserves more in-depth criticism beyond this paper. Whatever the implications of this, however, the visual framing of Whitaker's virtual choir goes far beyond what could be demonstrated with Brady Bunch-style clips alone. Whitaker's virtual choir depicts its own paradise, in which distant people can belong together. Whether it fulfills its own definition and promise, however, is down to subjective opinion. Via Taurus Mundi is an international collective of singers originally formed from summer schools in mainland Europe. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, they've released a number of virtual choir videos on YouTube, including Vienna Teng's Hymn of Axiom, what Teng describes as sacred music for big data. Teng is a former software engineer and clearly aware of the purposes of Axiom, now LiveRamp, a data onboarding company based in California. Written from the voice of a global marketing database, the song's choir entreats the user in a loving, caring way, ascribing human characteristics to machines that are constantly harvesting data points about our every online action and all virtual things we engage, purchase, and consume, as a way of better understanding who we are. Teng's recent intimate musical style embraces electronica and synthesized sounds. The Hymn of Axiom uses a vocoder to manipulate Teng's vocals and simulates a distorted, robotic sound. The clear narrative setting of Teng's music makes for an interesting dramatic staging by Via Taurus Mundi in virtual choir format. Lyrics of the song are displayed at the bottom of the screen in a pixelated font. The grid format featured in most virtual choirs is obfuscated by dark backgrounds and focus lighting. Use of stock footage, for computer, coding and privacy notices, frames the music and performance content, reinforcing the spirit of the text. As the song progresses to its threatening outcome, sounds distort further with the use of auto-tune and manipulation in the mixing. The dramatic denouement comes with the text, "Now we possess you." The framing of the virtual choir changes. The camera angles of the singers change from being just at eye level to underneath several of them, altering perspective and giving the impression that they are larger. Singers also use lighting to magnify their faces. There is a lot similar between these threatening auras and the kind of close-up voyeur horror seen in movies such as the Saw franchise and the Blair Witch Project.
I'm scared to close my eyes.
While perhaps an exaggeration for dramatic effect, the confluence of these clips suggests a real sense of threat and danger that comes from the unknown. The information we share online can be taken by innumerable users and used for good or ill by employers, insurance, governments, for better or for worse, as May Crockett titles her 2016 law review, "The Internet Never Forgets." Via Taurus Mundi's framing of Teng's song enables an alternate perspective of the risks to privacy posed in the present day, a perspective that would not be possible in traditional performance settings. Mozart's Ave Verum Corpus needs little introduction in amateur choral music circles. This recording, by the combined choruses of the London Symphony, City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, and Orfeo Catalla, presents the closest replica of the three selected case studies to what one may consider a traditional classical music performance setting. The video uses 3D rendering with photos to produce a simulated version of the Royal Albert Hall, the renowned London concert venue and home of the BBC Proms Festival, where the choruses are regular performers. The panning camera provides a variety of perspectives of the hall. Simon Halsey is positioned closest, conducting a string quartet, his back turned to the audience as a live conductor. Interestingly, when the image is reversed, a view of Halsey facing front is visible. Either Halsey will have filmed two separate conducting tracks at the different angles, or will have used two cameras to conduct simultaneously. Singers, roughly in their vocal sections, are presented in panning shots in an elevated distant position in the choir stalls of the Albert Hall. Here, their static and functional position feels quite normal. A concert attendee at the Royal Albert Hall may expect to see the choir positioned uniformly in choir stalls. With the exception of the long panning shots of the choir, camera angles and perspectives are largely as one might expect from watching a concert in the Royal Albert Hall, as an audience member or as part of a televisual audience. Virtual representations of spaces, much like their physical counterparts, may evoke characterizations of heritage. They can include memories, landscapes, cultural productivity, and a sense of temporal survival. Some virtual spaces can provide scope to present views and perspectives otherwise inaccessible physically. This version for Royal Albert Hall does not explore these possibilities in any significant manner. In a way, this video conveys simply a tribute to an important performance space for its participants. It aims for tradition, but this uncanny resemblance does reflect the beginnings of what one can bring to a digital rendering of a musical work. These case studies have demonstrated a range of commonalities in the construction of virtual choirs. Each video has demonstrated unique framing elements and, like other multidisciplinary, or at least multimodal, means of musical production, scope exists for new meanings and identities to be conveyed, reinforced, explored, or even undermined in the performance and consumption process. And that brings me to a point that one element that we didn't really have much time to explore is how this music is consumed, usually through video sharing platforms and social media. Strange Love observes, we do not merely watch online video. We engage each other in relationships through amateur online video practices. The nature of the platforms on which these videos are spread provides space for feedback, criticism, sharing, and further reinvention, as well as the place to redefine community existence. Whether in presentation of aesthetic and mise-en-scène, conceptual venues and spaces, or even in the positioning and presentation of individual singers, it's clear that the framework of a virtual choir provides alternate spaces for consumption, collaboration, and engagement, spaces which performing communities and producers could continue to embrace further. Thank you.